Agent Morris with the NSA.
We have identified some very, very interesting anomalous type of aircraft.
The traffic is quite luminous and is exhibiting some non-ballistic motion. Over.
Move very rapidly at any speed or whether any direction it wanted to go. Why it could change and go to the right or the left or go crossways without hesitating a bit.
What do you think it was?
Well, if they call it a flying saucer, that's what it is.
EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over. Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Good evening, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis, and it is Wednesday, January 10th, 2024. Thank you for joining us. This is the live weekly news roundup of the cat crying outside the door. I mean, the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka Anomaly Archives. And thank you for joining us wherever, whenever you're listening or watching. This is part 2 of our year in review for the wonderful, wonderful time that we all had in 2023. And with me tonight, as in most nights, is a good friend, friend of the archives, Victor Criterion, who may be chiming in now and again on this, that, or the other weird thing that we'll be reviewing from this past year of wonders and phantasmagorical stories from the dream time that you and I call life. Well, last week we got through half the year, January 2023 to June. And at that point, it was like, we better break this up in at least 2 parts. Hopefully not, as Victor was joking, 52 parts for the entirety of last year. Excuse me. And as usual, if you are not familiar with us, or if you are familiar with us, you can always go to our website, anomalyarchives.org. That's ANOMALY archives.org. And we'll be going over some of the many, many news articles that I've cherry picked from all the hundreds, thousands of news links that are there. This year, it was probably easily 1,000 news links. I don't know, but we've whittled it down as best we can. And of course, this is the stories that I find perhaps the most interesting. But before we dive into that, over at our Flipboard, flipboard.com/@Anomaly Archives, you can find the link to the Anomaly Archives Flipboard. And ton of stuff there. And as last week, I just kind of touched on some of the things that I flipped over most recently there. There is, of course, the big news coming up at the end of this week. What's happening in the world of UFOs and UAP? Well, that secret meeting, the meeting to discuss secret stuff, that's apparently finally happening with Congress. I don't hold your breath that any real revelations are going to be happening there, because of course, unless they get read into these programs, which is not likely to happen, they're not going to be able to be told, any significantly secret details. At best, we can hope that they are told why the intelligence director found David Grush's complaint to be valid and why he thought his claims were worth investigating. So, but still, may you live in interesting times, my friends, and we sure do. But some of the links that I flipped over: whistleblower says U.S. is hiding UFO the size of a football field. This is from, was it Metro.com? Basically, David Grush had a private small gathering with Wall Street folks and cryptocurrency folks, And what was he talking about? Again, the same thing he's always talking about now, his life in terms of the things that he's been told by others about strange government programs, crash saucers, pickled aliens, and all that good stuff. Meanwhile, Erling Strand over at societyforuapstudies.org has written 2 different synopses of the historic Project Hesdalen over in Norway. This is one of the longest running instrumented scientific attempts to quantify and record Earth lights or whatever type of mystery light this turns out to be that's been going on for decades, perhaps centuries, over in this valley in Norway. So we've got the link there to part 1, which covers June of 83 to March of 1994. And part 2, I believe, covers the rest of the time up until now. Haven't had the chance to listen to this interview, but a good friend of mine just reminded me of, I love Micah Hanks. He's a great friend of the archives and supporter of our work. And he's doing great work, as I've often referred people to his reportage, especially on the new UAP revelations. He's a great analyzer of all things UFO to Bigfoot and everything in between. And the most recent podcast is called Cryptoterrestrials: A Hypothesis of Earthly NHI Origins, and features him interviewing a philosopher and researcher. Lots of other interesting articles linked there. Also, this wasn't that recent, it's from November. So, hey, I guess I should put this in the flashback. In Newsweek.com, is U.S. on the verge of quote-unquote catastrophic UFO leak? What we know, or what we don't know. And a lot of other great, interesting stories, all of which can be found over at the links at the Flipboard, including, as Victor was saying, everybody's talking about jellyfish UFOs, UAPs, that is. And of course, Jeremy Corbell's latest release of military footage that shows some kind of strange shaped object. Again, not doing anything that would, to my mind, qualify it as a UFO other than it's unidentified until it is identified. But it looks to me like a bunch of balloons. Or, as we were discussing, bird poop on the... or I would say, somebody else I saw at the Metabunk forums suggested a molted spider carcass that's like hanging by a thread in front of the lens. I don't know. Anyway, it's fun to look at. Go check it out. There's video links there. But let's just dive right in, folks, to the rest of the links for this year. So yeah, starting in July of 2023, some of the articles that we covered included this Axios.com article, Learn About the Chupacabra Panic and Other Myths at History Miami. Again, over at Axios.com, stories of dragons, giants, and mermaids might call to mind Greek or Chinese mythology, but we also have our own storied history with otherworldly creatures. Of course, it makes sense that this Miami-based, I guess it's a museum, History Miami, would do an exhibit on the infamous chupacabras, and always put the S on the end. That's the proper spelling. But of course, the chupacabra has a long and storied history that most rational people suspect is just people misinterpreting a variety of different types of normal animals that may look abnormal due to different issues, skin issues, hair issues, that sort of thing. We might end up touching on this again shortly in another story, but yeah, I always like to see news reports on museums or other institutions that in the past didn't necessarily cover this kind of thing, cryptids and the strange and the unusual. And this wasn't even October yet. This is a news report on an exhibit that I guess was already running in July of last year. Jumping back right into the UFO UAP thing, of all places, Stanford Magazine, stanfordmag.org, ran this July 2023 article, First Contact. Gary Nolan is the man you call when there's no earthly explanation. Oh, there he is, looking all cherubic. Is that the right word for that look? I'm not sure. Look at his flat screen computer. But I remember when this came out, I was like, okay, wow, that's really interesting. I know that's where he works, is at Stanford, and he already has a very highfalutin reputation. And among some people, other people think he's a scam artist, like so many in the UFO field. But the dude's got a legitimate science background. He's got patents. He's really sought after for his work in what does he do? Biomedical stuff. Fascinating person, but it's a pretty good, interesting interview. But again, it portended things that were afoot at the Circle K, my friends. So we're going to be jumping around here. Meanwhile, that same month of July, over at KUT.org, the local NPR station here in Austin, Texas, Texas oak tree thought to be extinct, discovered in Big Bend National Park. This one reported on Texas Public Radio on July 24th. Hey, July 24th. And always love to hear about things that were presumed extinct being rediscovered. That's a good thing, if you ask me. And you didn't. So over at khou.com, this is one of the affiliates in Houston. One of the rarest whales on the planet spotted south of Galveston, fisherman says. Rice's whales are one of the world's most endangered marine mammals, and there are believed to be only about 50 to 100. Gosh, that's so few in existence, according to experts. And they were seen in the Gulf of Mexico. And just as we've reported all year on these kinds of sightings, because it just fascinates me when we get the chance to see rare animals. In this case, I believe out of place, like they're not usually in that area. Speaking of which, over at kltv.com, alleged big cat spotted along East Texas Road. Of course, all the experts say this is completely impossible. Caption says Edith Martinez was leaving the Woodcrest Mobile Home Park when she saw something mysterious across the street. She posted her video to social media, getting over 1,400 views. People commented saying it's a puma or a lion or maybe even a tiger. And I always have to relate this. Before, when I was just getting into strange alien animals, anomalous animals, out of place animals, this aspect of cryptozoology that is less about cryptids or presumably extinct animals is things that are seen in places they shouldn't, whether it's alligators in the sewers or kangaroos going down the road. Actually, that happened just around the corner from my house a couple of years ago. I kid you not. My family in East Texas, in the Goliad, Victoria area, they had their own story about a black puma-like big cat that was seen prowling around, possibly in or out of, in or near one of their trailers. And yeah, why do you know? I don't know. Strange. Meanwhile, over at vice.com, scientists control human DNA with electricity in leap forward study reports. As you know, we love new technology articles, especially just this with the CRISPR technology and this ability to rewrite the genome. It's just a fascinating arena that obviously portends much change in our futures. Hopefully, this is the kind of medical procedure that can benefit many, many people in the future and won't be relegated to just something that the elite use to extend their life while we serfs live on in agony. Oh, let's move along. Oh, wait, did I miss something here? Yeah, meanwhile, so we're still in July. Yep. No, that was most of it. So August was a big pleasant surprise in so much as I was finally able to see the fruition of, oh gosh darn it. Let's see if I can get this to work. Whoop. Yeah, the New York Times finally ran the piece that Annie Kelly had written that I had worked on with her starting in late 2022. And the article, How QAnon and January 6th Ripped the Conspiracy Theory World Apart, which was then retitled, Even Conspiracy Theorists Are Alarmed by What They've Seen. And this was finally released August 6th. It had actually been written months before, but as with any big media outlet, they were playing their cards close to their chest and waiting for this to come out. This is not the version on the New York Times website. It's behind a paywall, but you can find ways of viewing it. I've gotten a lot of positive responses from this. And in fact, a few weeks ago, my wife and I were standing in line waiting to be let into the Wildflower Center here in Austin. This is the Lady Bird Johnson's wildflower acreage where they promote wildflowers, yes, gardening and so forth. And every couple of years, they've had these interesting light art installations called, I believe, just illuminations or illuminations. And we're waiting to be let in, and some folks came up behind us, and they like suddenly surprised to recognize me, and it was my old boss at the Austin Public Library from my first years out of high school, and she and her significant other immediately were like, "Hey, I read about you in the New York Times." I'm like, "Wow, that's awesome." And they, like everybody else, just had very nice things to say about it. Meanwhile, that same month of August, our good friend Kurt Collins, over at one of his 2 or 3 blogs, The Saucers That Time Forgot, published this article on a topic that, of course, we covered in the Anomaly-NOW show, and which has long been a point of fascination for me. It really dovetails with my interest in the parapolitical aspect of UFOs and the paranormal, the possibility that people's beliefs in these strange phenomena could be manipulated. We know that they are. And the recurring theme of the idea of an external threat, as old Ronnie Reagan used to say, of an enemy from outside this planet that might bring the disparate communities of the world, the different governments that are all constantly fighting each other. It might bring them all together, might unite them against a common foe. So yes, August 11th, over at the saucers that time forgot.blogspot.com, Alien Attack Unites Humanity. It's an excellent overview with detailed timeline of the evolution of this idea and all the different points in space and time and human history and utterances of human beings that have talked about this very idea. Very much recommend it. In many ways, I think it's a silly idea that's not really something that we need to worry about, but I just find myself coming back to it over and over again because it's kind of the gross, large scale version of what I know in my heart happens on a small scale all the time, and suspect in the paranoid part of my brain cells is going on a large scale in some way, shape, or form. I'll leave that for you to decide. And meanwhile, I will describe something that we did also cover on Anomaly-NOW, and I know that Victor Criterion may want to share with us some of his creative ideas on this. But this is a great example of the possible, probable manipulation of people's beliefs and the UFO and alien threat as cover, and that is the Peruvian miners and this idea of um, uh, people, in this case, supposed illegal mining operations using aliens as cover to make it to scare the natives. In this case,
Yeah, this is particularly frightening to me since I live out in the woods, far away from people, near mining places. It strikes at home for me.
and you had been sending me at the time some of your AI assisted,
how I was trying to process what was going on. What would they look like? Of course, later we found out that they're more closely the people were on hoverboards rather than with jetpacks per se, even though that's what the government said was jetpacks. And the face slicing and trying to take people's faces didn't help any.
Yeah, and there seems to be a long history of South and Central American UFO cases with really scary bodily harm oriented aspects. Of course, Jacques Vallée investigated the chupas, the chupa chupas, the suckers, not to be confused with the chupacabra, who also suck the blood out of their victims, but what he was getting reports of these flying refrigerators, strange box-like small flying objects that were hunting the hunters that worked in the Amazon as hunters for finding food for their families or for selling in markets. But in this case, the authorities had said that no, these are illegal gold miners who are operating in the Amazon and are threatening villagers. And we never really got any good imagery of it, so I was very happy to see your renderings. And I mean, I saw a few attempts of people like taking really grainy footage and trying to do outlines based on those images. But again, I think this is a good example of this parapolitical use. Oops. Of why did that not click? Close. Meanwhile, that other one was from the Mirror, I think. This one's the Daily Mail. Flying 7 feet tall alien attackers in Peru were actually illegal gold mining gang on jetpacks, but again, not jetpacks, supposed hoverboards of some kind.
Right. Yeah, I don't know which is scarier, illegal gold miners or actual aliens.
Yeah. And I feel like it was shortly after this, and this is not in my list of, this was actually the best picture, but except that this was not a picture of the actual hoverboard operators. This was the famous, I believe, French hoverboard operator
Right.
that this apparent witness was saying this is what it looked like, not this was a picture of it. But very fascinating. But it reminds me of the case I think that came right after this with the Las Vegas meteor UFO crash and aliens in the backyard news report, and with body cam footage of the cops and investigating and interacting with the family who made the allegation. Don't know what to make of any of this stuff, but again, I think this is a great example of, as I say, the parapolitical manipulation of people's beliefs.
And it was just part of how crazy 2023 was for paranormal things.
Indeed, it just keeps ratcheting up. Well, thank you, Victor. Yeah, and sadly, there's been no further reporting that I've been finding on that situation down there, whether they were caught or not.
And no,
hopefully we might see or hear.
I sent you a link for someone who went down there to investigate, and I haven't watched that yet, but that was a month or two ago.
Oh, and I have to go back.
Nothing really new came out of it other than they were trying to take off people's faces.
Yeah, that was one of the more horrific aspects of this, was the bodily harm that was being threatened, and you hear so many horror stories by the cartels and whatnot, and so in this case, some kind of gold mining cartel, though really comes down to the bloodthirsty ruthlessness of corporations, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, moving right along. Okay, here's our other chupacabra, or is it? Strange sighting, Hill Country Village, baffled by mysterious creature. The wild animal spotted on a north side home on Tuesday. The property owner is now asking the public to help identify it. I don't know if there's some of the pictures. Again, this most likely explanation is some kind of coyote or canine with mange, but it's weird. This something about the coloration and the positioning just looks different to me than a traditional canine. Again, I don't think there's ever been any follow-up. The creature just went off into the woods, and all we have are these photos that the homeowner took in their backyard down there in San Antonio. What you gonna make of that? Now, we do have to touch on some of the passings. I didn't mention, of course, in February of last year, we lost Robbie Graham, who was the editor of the book that I was so lucky to be a part of, UFOs Reframing the Debate. And of course, there's been so many people lost. Obviously, we can't cover them all, but Lee Spiegel was one who was notable in that he was a pretty mainstream journalist. and sadly he passed away. And right around the same time, mutologist, UFO, cattle mutilation, animal mutilation researcher David Perkins. For those who are familiar with the Anomaly Archives, you probably saw he and I have a discussion in 2020 during the Streamathon where we were talking about his work and the idea of a Gaian UFO hypothesis and how animal cattle mutilations might figure into that, and how that had informed his perspective and coming to terms with the idea of the UFO phenomena being some kind of manifestation of a Gaian mind, possibly. Like my favorite researchers, he didn't necessarily assert that this was absolutely the case. It was just one of the hypotheses that that he considered probable. And this remembrance was written by our good friend Miguel Romero, aka Red Pill Junkie, over at the Daily Grail, dailygrail.com. Yeah, David and Lee, they will be missed. Robbie Graham, they're all going to be missed. So that same month, the New York Times in August had scientists recreate Pink Floyd song by reading brain signals of listeners. Okay, so I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan. If you didn't know, grew up loving listening to Pink Floyd music, and always tended towards Roger Waters over David Gilmour. It becomes a little bit more complicated these days. But meanwhile, the subtitle audio sounds like it's being played underwater. Still, it's a first step toward creating more expressive devices to assist people who can't speak. Again, love this kind of technology. As much as it terrifies me, the idea of scientists and corporations and terrorists, who knows what, the government, the military being able to peer inside my brain or read my thoughts remotely, or figure out what I'm dreaming. At the same time, there's good, and it's just the whole double-edged sword of technology. This one over at the New York Times. Back to cryptids. So there was actually some pretty big stuff happening over in Loch Ness. Yes, TheGuardian.com reports Loch Ness monster enthusiasts gear up for biggest search in 50 years. Using drones and acoustic equipment, hundreds of volunteers from around the world take part in the Surface Watch. This, I believe, as we reported, is one of the most multimodal, instrumentated investigations of good old Nessie over in Loch Ness. And in fact, I believe it was our friend Ken Gerard who is one of several Texas-based cryptozoologists who was actively involved in that investigation over there. So I think I misreported in last week's show that I had mentioned that Stephen Greer had his anniversary UFO briefing on my birthday on June 12th. And I think I misstated that the Grush congressional UFO hearing happened that same month. It was actually in July. But did I already miss that? Gosh, am I in the right month? Did I skip over? Whoops. No, I don't know. Anyway, so this isn't about that. This is a UFO whistleblowers think tank announces groundbreaking UAP event. No, this wasn't the congressional hearing that they were talking about. This is the think tank that Grush is associated with, which I think was revealed in either his resume or whatever was released as prep for the congressional hearing, and in that there was a reference to the Sol Foundation, which this article is talking about being revealed. UFO whistleblower Dave Grush is part of a unique UAP-focused foundation hosting its very first event about UFOs in November. Grush gained international attention when he sought whistleblower protection and publicly revealed allegations that the U.S. has a secret UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program. Now the group he said he is part of, the Sol Foundation, has just officially launched and is seeking researchers and collaborators, I think is what they're looking for there. This was postapocalypticmedia.com. I am not familiar with that outlet. It's probably got some UFO enthusiasts there. This one by Stephanie. Don't know anything about old Stephanie there. Moving right along, back to the weird, the Fortean, the cryptozoological, the paranormal. Jeff, the talking mongoose. I'm sorry, it just does not get any better than talking mongooses. And the movie came out, and I finally saw it and loved it. And it's less the story of Jeff and more the story of Nandor Fedor, but it's still an entertaining and thoughtful explication of the incidents, though not as detailed on the weirdness of Jeff himself. But hey, but this was over at atlasobscura.com, the bizarre true story of Jeff the talking mongoose. Oh, and Jeff was a ghost too. And the eighth wonder of the world. You just gotta read about Jeff. It'll make you smile, I hope. It's just very strange. Very, very strange. The story of Cashin's Gap and the family's daughter. That says, I think they spell it wrong there. They spell it here Volrrey. I think it's pronounced Vori, but some people think that she was a skilled ventriloquist and it was all a hoax perpetrated by her. But who really knows? Because mongoose, they might be able to talk, right? Especially if they're actually poltergeists. Well, where are we now in our months? Did I actually skip over July? I guess. No, I started with July. Okay, derp. So moving into September became NASA, the UFO UAP month. There's just so much to talk about as far as September. NASA to release and discuss unidentified anomalous phenomena report over at nasa.gov. UFO whistleblower Dave Grush tells me everything. This is a really worthwhile video to watch, put out by this fellow. I'm going to get his name wrong, but he has a vodcast called American Alchemy. It does some fantastic interviews with top-rated people, and thanks to a listener acquaintance online, was like, "Hey, if you haven't watched this, you should really watch it." And I did, and I've been watching a lot of this guy's videos. It's really good stuff over at American Alchemy. But this UFO whistleblower Dave Grush tells me everything. Very worthwhile and interesting, as is everything on that person's YouTube channel. Also that month, over at religiondispatches.org, from civil rights liberals to new age conspiracy theorists, what Betty and Barney Hill's alien abduction story reveals about America. I haven't actually had the chance to read this article, but the reason I want to point it out is because there is an increasing analysis of the Betty and Barney Hill case as the, of course, prototypical. Is that right? The very first alien abduction report publicized in North America, and how it really does kind of create the mold that would go on and be mimicked over and over in the ongoing reports by others of close encounters and abduction phenomena. And I believe last week I mentioned, not as part of this roundup, but a recent article that was part one of a series by Tanner Boyle, I believe is his name, who also was just interviewed on Erica Luke's Expanding Frontiers Research podcast the other night. And really some interesting analysis, again, from a more of an anthropological perspective. And I think there's a lot to this issue of the fact that this most famous seminal case involves an interracial couple, and how racial tensions seem to be such an integral part of the abduction narratives as described by experiencers, abductees, etc. But again, this one's over at religiondispatches.org. And I just mentioned EFR, Expanding Frontiers Research.org. That is Erica Luke's and Jack Brewer's and others nonprofit that is in Utah. EFR announces online UFO archive. This is really the last year or so has been the year of UFO archives. Of course, with Rice University launching theirs publicly in 2022, the David Marler's in New Mexico, joining forces with CUFOS, and Erica and Jack launching and expanding their efforts there in Utah. And they've got a great collection that's accessible online now over at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. And so I just wanted to briefly touch on that. And they got some local news coverage at the Salt Lake Tribune newspaper. sltrib.com is the truth about aliens in this SLC archive. A Utah group is putting UFO docs online, and that's always great to see these kinds of endeavors getting the media attention that they so deserve. Meanwhile, again, like I said, this is the month of NASA and UFOs, UAP. NASA, like Arrow, taking on the A in UAP as not aerial but anomalous. Yay! Update NASA shares UAP independent study report, names director. We'll probably post a couple different links because there was just so much going on with NASA this month in last year. Another one we lost last year, good friend, parapolitical researcher Ken Thomas. This obituary written by Lauren Coleman over at his Twilight Language blog, which is copycateffect.blogspot.com. Author and conspiracy theorist Ken Thomas passes away. These photos, of course, are from our wonderful Paramania get together in what year was that? Gosh, 2018 in New Orleans. There is Miguel, Ken, and Carlos. And then Ken just by himself, both of those pictures at Jim Garrison's grave there in New Orleans, Nolans. And, speaking of archives, Ken Thomas was an archivist who worked there at one of the universities and donated his personal archive and collection to that university that he had recently retired from, or some years ago retired from. There's Tim Banal and I on either side of Ken Thomas on the steamboat that we went on. A very old picture of Greg Bishop with Ken Thomas in front of a Ryder truck, a reference to the Oklahoma City bombings, and on and on. Lots of photos. Ken with Paul Kimball, Ken with Judge, Ken with Skylar Alphagren and Jim Mars, and so many others. Ken is definitely already missed, and fair travels, brother. Meanwhile, Vice.com continuing their coverage of strange stuff, including 15 years ago, UFO sightings rocked a small Texas town. The mystery remains. The 2008 sightings in Stephenville, Texas, are explored in the first episode of Vice Studios' new Netflix show Encounters. It's a pretty good series. Is this? God, am I confusing this? It says, was this also Steven Spielberg production? Now I'm really confused. More than usual, folks. Well, I ran out of all the stuff that I had already pre-opened, so we're going to have to go back to my handy dandy list here and move into October. So that blog I mentioned, Tanner Boyle's blog, is tannerboyle.substack.com, and he's got a number of really good series there, including his Forbidden Science Dispatches, where he's reading from the beginning the various volumes of Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science journals, writing articles based on his exploration of those. And I believe also there's many references in the little thumbnail picture. Here is a picture of a very young Jacques Vallée on the beach with Betty and Barney Hill. Love that photo. Other stuff from October of last year: Hauntingly Real Tragedy, Why Austin Ghost Tours Say National Franchises Are Putting Businesses at risk. We covered that in Anomaly-NOW. And, just like the New York Times article that I was featured in talking about conspiracy theorists, there's this, I believe his name's Brendan Lee Regan, who has defected to the other side. No, he's come to his senses. No, he's had a crisis of conscience. Brendan Lee Regan is a former 9/11 truther, conspiracy theorist who's reformed and really doesn't want to see things like the January 6th riots, etc., and the other conspiracy-minded atrocities that have happened, like the Pizzagate shooting, etc. This article from, I believe, theguardian.com, Escape from the Rabbit Hole, the conspiracy theorist who abandoned his dangerous beliefs. He's been traveling the world. He actually got to speak at an international conference over in England on the subject. Meanwhile, further evidence points to footprints in New Mexico being the oldest signs of humans in the Americas. That from AP, Associated Press News.com. Texas red-crowned parrots. Something unusual was just discovered about them. That one's over at KXAN.com. It's a local news channel. Of course, here in Austin, we have the monk parakeets who are thriving, and that's kind of the take on that Texas red-crowned parrots article, is that just for whatever reason, climate, urban environment is actually turning out to be very successful for these different parrots and parakeets. And it's, I love the monk parakeets. Are just the cutest, weirdest little things here. They're smaller than parrots, but they roost in lighting structures and telephone poles and utility poles, and they just make this silly little chattering all the time. They're just one of the chatteringest birds, and you get the impression that other birds just look at them with disdain, like, y'all just won't shut up, will you? But they're adorable. They're also dangerous for the nests that they build sometimes. But meanwhile, let's see. Daughter of UFO researcher James McDonald wrote UFO psychology thesis. This is an article from, yet again, EFR, the Expanding Frontiers Research nonprofit that I mentioned, Erica Lukes and Jack Brewer. They're doing interesting work as they come across material in the archives, the collections that they've amassed. There's this nice little audio article, The Legend of the Hairy Man of Round Rock, just north of Austin, is the town of Round Rock, which has Hairy Man Road. Has its own legend of early settlers and a child that was lost in a storm and began living there on the road, feral, and became a hairy man, a typical Bigfoot type wild man legend. The town has embraced this and now has a hairy man festival that's kid-friendly, family-friendly, and it's more about really hairy people as opposed to supposed unrecognized North American hominids as the traditional Bigfoot. But they're having fun with it, like so many communities that are embracing UFOs, paranormal, encrypted folklore. Meanwhile, we reported previously on the ivory-billed woodpecker spared, being declared extinct for now. This was from Coast to Coast AM, the Art Bell George Noory show, covering that. Meanwhile, we did finally get the 2023 consolidated annual report on unidentified anomalous phenomena, and you can read that in PDF form over at dni.gov. Again, the UFO UAP steamroller campaign just keeps rolling on in 2023 there towards the end of that year. Last year, Erie, Texas ghost towns worth exploring this fall. Of course, it was October, so you're going to have your plethora of haunting and ghostly news stories, with this one being from the Houston Chronicle, chron.com. And similarly, Hill Country Haunting, Erie History at Devil's Backbone Tavern in Fisher, dates back to the 1890s. Jumping back to UFOs, the big idea, why we should take UFOs seriously. This from Maclean's magazine over at macleans.ca. That's a Canadian magazine that, in this case, features lots of insights from our good friend and UFO researcher Chris Rutkowski, who is one of the moderators of the UFO Updates Facebook group. And still trying to get through this, but experiencers, what science can tell us, with Dr. Tyler Kochjon. This is a episode of Whitley Strieber's Unknown Country vodcast, where Jeremy Vaney is the host, and he's interviewing Dr. Tyler Kochjon, who is a researcher who did a really great investigation of abductees, experiencers, and contactees, whatever you want to call them, people who've had these strange UFO-related experiences, called Project Core, C-O-R-E, and they talk about that research project and, sadly, how it's not really been widely promulgated or replicated. And then, of course, we had Aero director Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick holding an off-camera media roundtable. This was October 31st, or at least that's when it was released, I think. And John Greenwald over at the Black Vault reporting on that. UFO nonprofit brings together Hollywood storytellers with Phenomenon's researchers. This one over at deadline.com. And then moving into the last 2 months, November, UAP, The Search for Clarity. This is a video featuring Sean Kirkpatrick over at the Hayden Center to explore unidentified anomalous phenomena. There's some very interesting clips I've seen from this. It has the feeling of Between Two Ferns, if you're familiar with the Zach Galifianakis Access Television-esque interview series. Not quite as funny, but there's some moments. But it does give you kind of a sense of really what Sean Kirkpatrick was like, and why he's ready to hand off the Aero directorship. Meanwhile, woolly mammoth de-extinction project underway in Dallas. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with bringing extinct animals back alive and reintroducing them into the wild? Who knows? Saul Foundation, how a new think tank of academics is applying cutting-edge research to the UAP mystery. Of course, this is multiple links to our good friend Micah Hanks' reportage on this, as I was saying earlier, who has done great work chronicling that. He was at the event at Stanford and has reported on that and interviewed all the people involved. Great analysis of that. There was this PDF, this paper released, The Ultra-Terrestrial Hypothesis, a Case for Scientific Openness to an Interdimensional Explanation for Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, from the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology. Again, this just interesting locations where in academic journals, this is getting more attention. I think that's a good thing. And lastly, for November, these clues hint at the true nature of OpenAI's shadowy Q project over at Wired.com. Victor was just before the show reminding me of the latest information on AI news, and boy, it's one of those like, wow, that's great. Is it? I'm not sure. I really worry, but that's kind of my personality. We're in the home stretch first, folks. December, the first secret asteroid mission won't be the last. This is from, the source may be something like New York Times. I'm not sure, but it's at DNYUZ, DNYUZ.com. There's so many minerals and wealth to be had, resources to be monopolized in these asteroids floating out in space. That's going to be such big business soon. And while they can probably do it without humans, there's going to be humans there doing repairs probably on all that machinery, though we'll have some self-replicating repair units, right? Also in December, U.S. Congress passes stripped-down measure to release UFO records. So the Schumer Amendment, or whatever, the UAP legislation that was going to be mimicking the JFK assassination document release, gutted, not happening, not the way it was intended. That was the big news in December. Texas man's photo of Black Panther creates buzz. Wildlife experts say it's not possible. Again, like the other news reports that we'd mentioned about pumas, Black Panthers, etc., being seen, and authorities saying, no, 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 cannot be. This is over at news.yahoo.com. And then I mentioned this in the last show. I've only recently learned about the Chinese spy balloon having used a US-based internet provider for its communication back to China, which is how our people actually were utilizing that data to also track it, just like the Chinese were, and to direct it, presumably. More AI news created. AI created virtual influencers are stealing business from humans. This is from arstechnica.com. And last thing I have here is mystery note found in sealed cereal box. And this is just one of those like weird WTF type of news articles from, in this case, Pahomage, Pahomepage? Oh, PA homepage, probably Pennsylvania. PAHOMEPAGE. It's just a weird situation where people are finding sealed food packages like cereal boxes, and inside finding little paper notes that the authorities and the news reporting is not telling us what's on these notes, but it's so freaking out the people that are finding it, partly just because how did it get inside the sealed packaging? That seems to be part of the freak out, but I get the impression that there's something about the nature of the messages themselves that's freaking people out. If you know anything about this, folks, please let us know. And with that, my voice is already getting sore, so I'm gonna call that's the wrap up for the 2023 year in review. Thank you for joining us, folks, and we'll be back next week. And hope you like and subscribe, comment, all that stuff. I did see that we had some comments, but I'm not sure whether to put those on air or not. All right, thank you, and good night.